Every video game needs some kind of input, whether it's something a little bit more text-based, so you're actually having to write out words, or you're having to use a mouse and keyboard, or a controller, motion controllers. There's always some kind of input that's necessary for a video game. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to set up bindings so you can control different things in your video game, and I'm going to show you how to use them in both Blueprints and C++ in Unreal Engine 4. So let's go and jump right into it. So first thing you want to do is you want to open up your project. I already have mine open. So once you have that open, you want to go into your project settings. So if you've created a brand new project, you should see that there's a project settings tab up here. If you don't have it or you've closed it, just go over here into settings and just go and click on project settings, and it'll open up a new tab and just kind of bring it up for you. Next thing you're going to want to do is over here on the left, you're going to see all these different options for settings you can modify. Over here under engine, you're going to see input right here. This is where we go to handle all of our mappings for whatever game we're making. So this is actually a first person example template. So there's actually already some set up. Let me actually first explain what the difference is between action and axis is. Action mappings are just a single, not necessarily a single button press. The best way to explain it would be you have, so for example, if I go press 1, that's it, that's one action mapping. If I press spacebar to jump, that's an action mappings. You can actually see that there's a couple here, jump and fire. Typically these are things where there's no inverse of it. So for example, when you're looking at move forward, there is an inverse of move forward, and that's move backwards. When you're turning right, there's an inverse to that, and that's turning left. And that's where you would typically throw your axis stuff. You don't need to use axis. If you want, you could just completely program it so that way, you know, W is forward, S is backwards, instead of putting it into an axis. But how they set up in Unreal Engine is this is how they have it set up. So jump, there's no inverse to that in the example project. You know, there's no like slam down or anything like that. So in order to create a new mapping, what you want to do is first we're going to create a action mapping. So right here next to action mapping, go and press this plus. It'll create a new action mapping. So we'll just go and call this new action. And we'll go ahead and bind it to, let's go and choose something on the keyboard. Let's go C. Why not? So once we press C, it will run new action, which I will show you how to set up in a second. And then let's go and create an axis mapping as well. So we'll go and call this new axis. So there's actually a couple of ways of going about creating an axis depending on how you want to do it. You can create it using a keyboard, you can use a mouse, and you can use a controller. So I actually have a controller. I did want to show you guys how to set that up as well. So what I'm actually going to go and do is I'm actually going to create two axes. So let's go ahead and create a second one. We're going to call this one keyboard axis. I'm going to show you how to set up an axis for the controller as well. So what we're going to do, let's go and open up Gamepad. And Gamepad will work for a variety of different inputs. From what I know of, it will use Xbox controllers. It will use PS4 controllers. I'm pretty sure it will use VR motion controllers as well, if I recall. Don't quote me on that one. I may be wrong about that one. I'm pretty sure it does work for VR controllers as well, if I recall. So anyways, once you go and set up the gamepad, let's go ahead, let's do gamepad left thumbstick x-axis, y. Let's do x-axis. So in case you're unfamiliar, let me go and show you here real quick. X-axis on a controller, so we're using the left thumbstick. X will actually be left and right, and then y-axis will be up and down. So that's how that works, and then the same for the right thumbstick as well. Left and right is X, and up and down is Y. Scale we'll leave at 1.0. Scale. So scale is actually something you. So let me go and show you here with the move forward. You can actually see it will show what that button actually registers as. So you can see right here, W is 1, that's forward, and then S is backwards, so that'll be a -1 because it's in the inverse direction. And then the same for the up and down arrow keys. And then you can actually see that they actually set up the left thumbstick as well here. They already set a lot of the things that you need, so even for controllers and things like that. Okay, and it looks like I was wrong. The Oculus Touch and the Valve Index, they do actually have their own thumbstick, so I was wrong about that one. So yeah, you can actually see that they have their own. So Gamepad though will work for Xbox and PS4 controllers. So what I'm gonna also do is right here under keyboard access, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up two keyboard buttons, I and K. The reason I'm choosing those two is I is right above K, and I want for them to be fairly close to each other, so that way we can easily see how the axis works. So I'm going to go and choose one here. Let's go and do. Actually, I'm just gonna go and look it up. So if we go ahead and just type in I up here, it will actually look up whatever we're looking for. So there's I, and then in order to add a second button, just go and press this plus. And we can go ahead and choose K. You don't need to do it just in order to create an inverse scale like this. As you saw up here with move forward, you can actually just set it so multiple inputs will do the same thing. So you can see that they have, different VR controllers. They all do the same thing as the keyboard would do. Same with the regular gamepad. You can see that they all will do the same thing as the keyboard will. And in order to actually set this correctly, we need to set this scale to -1. That will actually set it so that way that will actually do the inverse of what I will do, which is what we want it to do, since they're supposed to be opposites of each other. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to now show you guys how to set this up in Blueprints first, and then I'll show you guys how to set up these bindings in C++ as well. So first thing we want to do is over here in Content Browser. So I don't actually have a Blueprint player right now, so I'm actually going to set one up. I'm going to show you. So I actually have, this is a C++ project. So the player is set up in C++. A really neat little trick you can do is if you right click on a C++, you can actually create a Blueprint class based on a C++ class. So it will do all the same things as the C++. It'll just be now we can modify it in Blueprints even further, which is really nice. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to go and stick it right in content, and we'll just leave it my tutorial character. So once this creates it, it opens up in a new window. So this is what it looks like. It's completely based off of what we have in C++, and you can see that the parent class is a tutorial character. So let me go and shift this over here because I'm going to need to see the project settings, possibly. So what we want to do is setting up the keys in Blueprints is actually really easy. So all we want to do is, if we go back, we can actually recall what we had named our mappings and everything. So right here, so let's go and grab new action, since that was one we created. Ooh, new action. You can see that we get an action event right here. So we go and do this, and we can see this is how it gets set up. So let's go ahead, and let me first actually explain this. So pressed does exactly what you think it will. Pressed is if I press down on whatever key new action was set to, which was, what did I set that to? C. So if I press down on C, it will do whatever we have in pressed. So let's go ahead and set up something here real quick. I'm just going to set up a print string. We'll say C is pressed Ooh. My spelling's all over the place today. Released will do the exact same thing. So if we go and do another print string, I'll go and show you this one as well. C is released. And then right here we have key. It's just whatever key was pressed during this action. In this case, we only have the one set up to the action, so only one can be pressed anyways. So that's not really a big deal. So we're going to go and move that. And we're just going to leave that alone as it is. Next we're going to go over the axis, which was called new axis and keyboard axis. So if we go and do new axis, and then we got keyboard axis. There we go. So these work slightly different. These will actually these will be running as long as these should always be running as long as the game itself is running. So if we go and create something here, let's go and print string, and then axis value is really the important part usually when you're creating an axis. So axis will actually show what the current value is of the axis. So in the example of new axis, we can see we set that up to the gamepad. So when the left thumbstick is all the way to the left, our axis value will be -1. If it's all the way to the right, it'll be +1. If it's in the middle, it'll be 0. And if it's somewhere in between any of those three, it will be some sort of decimal number within that, depending on how much you have moved. The keyboard tends to work a little bit differently. You only have 3 values you can get when you're using only keyboard. I will be +1. K will be -1, and if nothing is pressed at all, it'll be 0. There is no in between because each keyboard only has pressed and not pressed. So you can't actually create a value in between there unless you were to add in more keys. But that just isn't usually that great. So we're going to go ahead. Actually, let's go and create an append. Go and break that. The reason I'm creating an append is because we can actually see what axis we're controlling. So let's just do gamepad, and then we'll just go ahead and do another print string here, and we'll go ahead and make an append right there. So we go and pull that over, drag that in there. We can go and drop our axis in there, and we'll just call this one keyboard. So that in case you're unaware, that what the append does is it will grab whatever text I have put in here, and it will also grab the axis that I have right here, and it will go ahead and print that out all in one. Up here I didn't bother doing that just because there's only 2 actions that can happen. That's all I'm looking at right now. So just go and compile, save. Let's go and grab this, drag it in there. Let's just go and double check, make sure that we have it set so it will actually grab the input, if I can find it somewhere down here. There we go. Auto possess player, we want to possess player 0, and we also want to receive input from player 0 as well. So if we go and do that, we press play, we can actually see we have gamepad and keyboard are constantly pressing out. So let's first go over the action real quick. So if we press C, that's why I wasn't clicked on it. So if I press C, you can actually see it's actually moving a little bit fast, so you actually can't see it, but you can see that the text is shifting. If I actually go into here real quick, let's see here. I can actually look up, where is it? So the output log will actually show the same thing that was being printed out here unless you tell it otherwise. I'm actually just going to go and look up C is pressed. There we go. So you can see that it was actually printing out C is pressed, and we have C is released. So C is released will only do right after you release it. It doesn't do constantly like with the axis. So let me actually just go and do this. So So that way you can actually see when it's being pressed. So if we press C, you can see if I press it, it says pressed. If I release it, it says released. And you can see that's how that one works. Then if we go back in, we can look at the axis real quick. So let's go and drag these back in there. Wrong one. So if we go and press play, so let's start with the gamepad. So if we move the left thumbstick all the way to the right. Oh, I don't have that clicked. If we move it all the way to the right, you can see that slowly starts increasing. And the reason the player's moving is because that's part of how Unreal Engine set up the first-person template. So that's how. So it's just automatically moving the player. And if we move it all the way in the other direction, you can see that slowly increasing to -1 until we have it all the way over to the left. So that's how that works. And up and down doesn't actually do anything to the axis unless you're slightly moving to the right or left. So you can see that's how that's working. Now if we go ahead and mess around with I and K, we can go and press I and you can see it automatically jumps to 1. Now if we go and choose K, you can see it automatically jumps to -1. There's no in between, as I said earlier, because there is no partially pressed down keyboard or anything like that. You know, there's nothing like that. It's simply, it's pressed or it's not. So it's 1 or it's not. And then the same for K as well. And that's how that works. So now we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go and disconnect these real quick. Actually, I probably didn't even need to disconnect these in all honesty. But we're going to go and jump into C++. I'm going to show you guys how this works. So now we're in our C++ file, and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to create all the inputs for the player. So you can see, since I already have a C++ class, since I'm working off of the since I made my VR template with C++, you can see I already have a whole bunch of stuff in here. So all this stuff is already all set up. But the part we're interested in for the input is there's going to be a function, if I can find it. Here we go. Set up player input component. So this is where we go to set up our input in C++. You can see that there's always some setup here. So it's essentially the same thing as you see here. So we're going to go and do this. We're going to go ahead, go over here to our header file, and we're going to go and create 3 functions. We're going to do void. We're going to need 4. Yeah, 4. So we're going to need so let's go ahead, new axis pressed. And we're also going to want void new axis released. And then we're going to have 2 for the axis as well, for the axes, both of the axis values. So we're going to go and do void. Let's go and set new. Actually, it just occurred to me I did the wrong thing for this. New action. That was supposed to be action, my bad. So if we go down here, new axis value. Actually, let's just call it new axis value. Now this is important. When you're creating in C++, when you're trying to do an axis value, you do need a float in there. So let's go ahead and do float axis value. That's what we'll call it, axis value. And then we'll also go and create one called keyboard axis float axis value. And then you can see it's actually erroring out for just because my computer's running a bit slow, or Visual Studio is running a bit slow. So there we go. So once we have these created, you could just write it out. I'm just going to go ahead and just create the definition right here real quick, which might take a second. Alright, so there we go. It just went ahead and created our functions for us here in the CPP file. I just prefer to do that. It's a little bit quicker. You don't have to. If you want, you can manually write it all out, you know. But I'm not going to bother with that. So the reason we created the functions is because that's how the bindings work in C++. So essentially we're calling a function. So let's go ahead, if we go up here, we're just going to go down here. I'm just going to go and comment this out just to make it a little bit neater. Tutorial bindings. Alright. So in order to create an action binding, we'll start with that. We want to grab the player input component, which you can see we get from up here in the top here. And then we're going to bind action. Here we put whatever the name of the mapping was. In this one, let me just double check that. Project settings. Yeah, it was new action. So if we go and do new action, this, oh, my bad. I forgot. We first need to specify if we're doing it for pressed or release. And then we do this. And then we call the function that we need a tutorial character. And what do we call it? Bind action, or I'm sorry, new action pressed. Yep, new action pressed. There we go. And then so that will set up so whenever we press whenever we press the C key, it will call this function. And we're also going to set for released as well. Bind action. It will still be new action, but this time we want to do it for IE underscore released. In this case, everything else will be the same. Well, almost the same. We do need to change the function we're running here. New action released. There we go. And that's how the actions will set up. And we'll go ahead and set those up here in a second to print out to the, so we can print out and have that all run just fine. Next, we're going to want to set up the both of the axis values. So if we go and do bind axis, okay. So let's go and grab the first one, which is actually first we need the name. New axis. That's the wrong thing. New axis. This, we don't have IE pressed or released or anything like that because it's an axis in this case. We do a tutorial character. And then this one is new axis. And there we go. And then we're also going to create one for the keyboard axis as well. Bind axis. What do I call it? Keyboard axis, right? Yes, I did. Axis, comma this at a tutorial character. I believe I call it keyboard axis, didn't I? I did. Cool. All right. So there we go. This is how we set up our bindings. So the new axis and keyboard axis, these will both be binded to their respective functions, and then the same with bind action. So now let's go ahead and go down here. We'll go and create just some logs. So there is a way to print it out on the display when you're creating your when you're going to debug it. So you can do it similar to how it was in how I set it up in Blueprints. I'm going to do it slightly different. We're just going to do a UE log. Actually, hold on. Shoot. The heck was it called in order to do that? Log. Oh, okay. Alright, so down here in the function, we're just going to do a UE underscore log. Ooh. Log temp, comma warning, text. And we're just going to do C is pressed. And we'll do the same for the released as well, except we'll say C is pressed. Or, I'm sorry, released. Log temp, comma warning, text, C is released. And there we go. I'll come back to the axis just because you saw because I don't want the axis to completely muffle out. I guess you could say, the actions. So once we have that done, we're just gonna go and compile, and this will take a second. Once that's done, we can go ahead and see how this works. All right, so it's finished compiling. I'm gonna go and clear the logs, that way and I've gone ahead and typed this in so we can make sure we're not getting anything extra that we don't need to see, at least for this tutorial. And I've gone ahead, I've deleted the blueprint character, and I just dragged back in the C++ character. In all honesty, you could have left the blueprint character. It really wouldn't have made much of a difference. But I just went ahead and did that just for the sake of it. So we can go ahead. So if we look down here in the... Ooh, my bad. If we go ahead and look down here in the output log, this is where it's actually going to print to. So if we go into here, press C, and then released. C, released. And you can see it's actually printing down here in the bottom down here. And yeah, so that's how that one works. And we're going to go ahead and set up the axis. So in order to print the log for the axis values, we're going to go and do UE log temp warning text, and we'll say axis value f, and then we'll just go and drop an axis value as our extra parameter there. So that will actually log axis value right here. And then let's just go ahead and jump into here, create a log for the keyboard. Keyboard axis f, and then again axis value. If you're not familiar with C++, this will actually grab this axis value because it's in this function. This will grab this axis value because it's in this function. Just to put it simply. We're just going to go and compile again. Alright, so the compiling finished. I went in and cleared the log. I removed the CIS so we can see the axis values. So if we go and press play here, and scroll this actually all the way to the bottom, you can see it's already printing out the axis values. So let's see. So I and K were for the keyboard. So you can see that's switching between 1 and -1 and 0, depending on which one I have pressed. So if I actually go I and then K, you can actually see it goes to 0. And there you go. And then for the gamepad, you can see that that's actually going through as well. If we slowly increase it, you can see it slowly increasing, slowly decreasing. There you go. So then that is, so that's how the input works. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Until next time, see ya.